everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations. You're with Simon today. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about what is evolutionary astrology, how does it differ from the different ways that you can use astrology to interpret a birth chart or your birth details, and why it's actually very important to be clear about not taking two systems of thought and bringing them over or overlapping each other, because there's just a lot of confusion that takes place with that. So, like I said, my main intention here is to really help create clarity in terms of what EA is within the context of astrology. Now, astrology itself is simply just an observation of the skies and our ability to notice the patterns in life and then make an observation correlation, right? And through the different eras of human evolution, we've shaped and changed and molded the different ways that we can interpret the skies, right? Now, one of the things that I really loved about EA was that, to me, inside of my own personal self, and many other people out there that feel the same kind of frequency, is that we know that as a human race, we're approaching a change within a greater cycle of evolutionary dynamic. Okay, and I find that EA or evolutionary astrology came in at a time where it would help us transition from a way of looking at life to a new way of looking at life, right? And that is the integration of the actual self or the soul or the inner space, right? And you know that when you watch my YouTube videos, you'll see that I'm always talking about what is the relationship to yourself and how does the astrology help you connect with that inner space. So what EA does is, through its principles and its paradigm, help you get to the core or the why behind this incarnation. And it helps you process some really, really complex stuff that you as a human being carry with you across different timelines. And the power that exists within this is that in the past, EA was very much, or should I say astrology was very much about a predictive tool. It was very much about helping us make sense of upcoming events where fear was really our driving force behind it. So predictive astrology in a way of trying to look at the future, but it also in some sense was like, oh, what's your sun sign? What's your moon sign? And there was some, there was a discovery of personality traits that astrology could give us, right? Whereas what EA does is it says, okay, all these things are fantastic and it's great, but did you know that you could actually connect a deeper metaphysical storyline to this more conscious sense of self? And in actual fact, on my website, there's a whole entire teaching on called the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, which is helping us see how the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant is, through the lens of EA, is actually something that helps you illuminate this metaphysical path. But you need to know it's there, and how do you connect that? So evolutionary astrology helps us through recognizing the deep core desires, the unfinished business that we have, understand those attachments, and then helps us see the destiny line that we have available to us, right? And this is all within the birth chart. Now, in the context of understanding this, it's helpful because once we begin to actually make a connection to this metaphysical place, we start to recognize that there is a deeper layer of our existence that goes beyond just the personality traits of the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. So it is like essentially the study of the cycles, right? Deeply rooted in EA is the study of cycles and the motion of our desires across time and space. Now, in order for us to be able to actually grasp that, we would need to have a specific tool or way of looking at the birth charts in order for us to read that. And so deeply sort of associated with EA itself is the house system that it uses, which I'll get into a bit later, and why Porphyry is the chosen house system for EA. And it doesn't mean that you can't use another house system, absolutely not. It just means that through the lens of EA, when you're trying to understand the context of the soul and its movement across time, there's a specific house system. So how does it differ from mundane? Of course. And again, the point here is that it's adding in this deeper unconscious layer to prior lifetimes. And I remember distinctly that Sri Yukeshwar, who was the man that, the teacher to Yogananda, who ultimately influenced Jeffrey Wolf Green, as well as Dane Rajah and another person called Aurobindo, who Mark Jones had brought into his work and started to notice that he was influencing Jeffrey. EA was bringing in this dimension of the soul. It was bringing in this other layer of reality that we're, as a human race, are actually being able to be exposed to right now. The veil is very thin. And we can touch that. We can begin to access that source creation. And the way that we do that is by recognizing these cycles, rooted in natural law, understanding how these things work. And something that's really important to know when understanding evolutionary astrology and why it uses this lens is that if we are to see the dynamic path of the soul, there needs to be an acknowledgement of this multidimensional self that is existing. So it opens us up to that layer. And again, when you look at a birth chart, it's not static from EA's perspective. It's a constant motion. And that moment of time that you were born in is a reflection of what you incarnated. And from that point onwards, the cycles will continue to moving. So that's why we look at progressions as an example. And all of this is already coded into the soul's evolutionary path, right? So there's a really profound thing to see that there's a difference between looking at, say, for instance, Jyotish astrology or Vedic astrology or sidereal astrology, because those systems have their own idea of measurement. And again, if you're looking at life through that lens and that's the system that supports you, fantastic. But in the context of what EA does, it's very much around asking the question, why? Why is this like this? Why this lifetime? Why this experience? And you'll notice that when you're really investigating the astrology chart and you're doing the observation correlation, you'll notice, like I said, that many charts are focused on resolving specific complexes in each life, and that it's an ongoing nature of desire. For me, as an example, with Pluto in the 10th house, or any of you that have got Pluto anywhere in the house, it doesn't mean that that's the only place that you're going to have Pluto for one lifetime. It means that you're processing a deep core path of Pluto in the 10th house, but within that context, there are smaller dynamics that are being experienced as an integration to the Pluto, which will then set you up for the next lifetime. So Sri Yukeshwar and Yogananda and Jeffrey Wolf Green, as he was deeply influenced by them, is talking about that the soul is an ongoing movement. And we get to actually see that in the birth chart using a lens of EA, which is its specific role. It's the measurement, right? And the measurement of the cycles, the measurement of the times. And why we use that to answer that question, why this lifetime? Why those dynamics? Why the context of that, So again, if you have a look on the screen over here, I want to point some attention to, what zodiac does EA use? Well, evolutionary astrology uses the tropical zodiac, the Western house system, right? Which is different to sidereal. And there's a lot of debate and arguments and war and conflict around people saying that this is right and that is right. And honestly, it's actually pretty exhausting, because at the end of the day, does that really bring you to the core essence of your own being? Is it opening the space to see the reflection of your own relationship to the cosmos? So the question here is, what is the zodiac that EA uses? Because we're looking at life through the lens of what EA is trying to do, which is, again, map the soul's experience across time using this trinity, using the law of three, which again I'll talk about in the Porphyry hour system and why. So it's tropical, the Western. And we're talking about the psychological and emotional dynamics. Human beings have been evolving. And the natural evolution for us is that we have a cognitive sense of awareness now. In the past, we used to look at the sky and we used to relate to it in a very feminine way, which was the cycles, right? But we don't see it the same way. The human being alive right now and the cognitive awareness that we have right now, in comparison to, say, 6,000 years ago or longer, is different. You know, we didn't have watches or clocks or calendars at some point when we looked at the sky, and that's what we used as a system. But the invention of time, in terms of human understanding, has brought us to a psychological and emotional dynamic that differentiates us. And because of that differentiation, the tropical zodiac, the Western system, is born, because it maps our psychological and emotional dynamic across time, which is this dynamic of past, present, and future, right? That's all it does, time and space. So the difference between the zodiac simply is that in EA, Western, it's not measuring it through sidereal. So if you had to try and apply understanding the emotional and psychological and soul awareness story through a sidereal chart, you're going to have a different outcome completely. And because of that, you're not really going to be able to have a direct access to what EA is trying to do, which is ask the question, why? Why this time? Why this life? Why this incarnation? Right? It doesn't matter when it comes to seeing it from a more, okay, the natural sky. It's true. It's true. When you look at the natural sky, there are differentiations. But when we're looking at the human psychological and emotional dynamic, it has a different tone to it. It has a different developmental stage to it. So it's all about where our own perception of reality is and how we're interfacing with that and how we can connect ourselves to the cosmos. So Western system, it's understanding the psychological and emotional dynamics of the soul versus a fate or a karma dynamic, right? So when we look at the house system, right, I just want to talk to you about this. The house system of evolutionary astrology uses porphyry, right, or Koch, but porphyry system is the one that is used by EA. And Jeffrey Wolf Green, who, if you had the opportunity to learn about human design, he has a specific configuration in his human design that's all about trying testing, tried and tested, tried and tested. And there were two things that he kept on saying throughout the whole entire time when he brought this material forward. He said observation, correlation, and he always used to reference, out of all of the different house systems that he used to try and access the information that was given to him from, you know, the influence of Yu Kushwa and Dan Rudra and Yogananda, he settled on porphyry because he noticed that this gave the most amount of accuracy. Now again, we don't live in a definitive world. We live in a world that has certain expectations, and I have a direct example of that in my own personal life, right? So porphyry house system through the lens of EA is gaining us perspective on the soul's evolutionary path from this point up until the next point, and why these lifetimes. And it's broken up into the natural law of three. In other words, in EA, the natural law of three is sacred because, again, it's past, present, and future. So you have 4 quadrants, right? The 4 cardinal signs, and then each quadrant is broken into 3 houses. Now, these houses don't necessarily have to be exactly 30 degrees, but each quadrant has 3 houses in it. And so we're looking at the 4 angles of the precession of the equinox, which is the 4 cardinal points, east, west, south, and north, right? And then we have the dynamic of the human evolution within those 4 points. And so we have 3. So we have cardinal sign, fixed sign, mutable sign, cardinal sign, fixed sign, mutable sign. And it goes around and it basically divides the chart 3 4s, right? Or 4 3s, should I say, right? 4 points and 3 houses, then making up 12. Right? The 12 faces of the natural zodiac, the 12 faces of the human psychological experience. So we're not measuring anything else. We're measuring the human psychological experience as it connects to the soul across time. So the porphyry house system is rooted in this law of 3, the Trinity, the Vesica Pisces, past interfacing with present, interfacing with future. And one of the things that I want to go back to in terms of what is evolutionary astrology is that when you look at this 3D dimension, this 3D physical world and the body that's in it, you'll notice that there are certain laws that exist within this 3D realm, and sacred geometry is one of the ways that we can access this law. And we do know that there is this trinity of something that has materialized, something that is currently being materialized, and the potential. So the way in which EA tracks the soul is it goes, okay, well, there's a trinity here. There's Pluto. Pluto has a nodal axis, and that's not to be confused with Pluto's nodes itself. It's Pluto and its nodes. So the south node of the moon, the north node of the moon, and the moon itself. And the reason why is because when you look at Pluto in the chart, what you're actually looking at is the human beings or the soul's unfinished, unresolved desires. So the core emotional complex, the security attachments, is to brings us to this life. Now, in order for us to have a core security attachment to this life, we need to have had a past. And so the south node of the moon, which is the conscious sense of self, interfaces with Pluto. But it's always coming from what is already predetermined. In other words, what is the conditioning field that you already come in with, i.e. parents, social, economic status. And how do you relate to that in the moment, right? Because in each moment, you're relating to your past and your future. And that's where there's this constant tension between the north and the south node through the moon. And what drives that is Pluto. Another way that EA is deeply helpful in this sense, and what it differs from other forms of astrology, is it looks at the birth chart and says, okay, you've got two people over here, right? Both of them have Jupiter retrograde in the chart. First question is why? Why is there Jupiter retrograde? And the second thing is, what was the reasons for the soul choosing Jupiter retrograde in this incarnation, and how is it supporting the ongoing evolutionary direction of the soul? Those questions in and of themselves are really going to have such an impact for the person that's sitting in front of you. It says, hey, I've got Jupiter retrograde. I'm trying to understand what it means. Now, just very simply, if you had to synthesize this, you can, like I said, have two people born on completely opposite sides of the world. And one person, person A, right? And before I actually jump into that, let me give you a little brief summary of Jupiter retrograde. Jupiter represents to us the nature of how a person inwardly takes in the truth of life from their perspective. In other words, it's how you are taking in reality and how you are orientated towards that reality. So you're looking at life and you're saying, oh, okay, the cosmology I choose to use in life is numerology, right? Or I choose to use a Christian faith to help me process what this reality is about, right? Now, when the planet's retrograde, there is an individuation process that's taking place. There's a need to throw off. Now, like I said, you have two people, both Jupiter retrograde, born in different cultures, and one culture, the soul creates a reality in which the Jupiter retrograde is everybody else doesn't have a belief system that they follow. And here's the one person that has a very deep orientation towards being spiritually aligned, and yet feels deeply isolated in the community or in the environment because their lack of faith in a cosmology that is like Christianity, and this person's orientation towards a deeper spiritual truth leaves them separated from people. In other words, okay, I don't want to not believe. I have a belief system. It's deeply orientated to my own, but because the collective in this country doesn't have an overall general consensus of truth, the soul experiences itself differently. Right? You can have another, now person B as an example, grows up in a family structure in which the whole entire family is deeply conditioned by religion and says this is the way that it is. The society and the country says this is the way it is. And this person says, no, I want to be atheist. I don't believe in a God. So two people with Jupiter retrograde, one believes and the other one doesn't, and yet the context of the environment dictates the interface between having the same thing. Both people feel the very different, like their need to reject a truth or to feel rejected by a truth. And this is what it's about. It's looking at the chart and getting to the core of it and asking the questions why. And when you look at it holistically, in other words, when you look at Pluto and its nodes and Saturn squaring Mercury in the 9th house as an example, you'll be able to, through observation correlation, actually get a very clear picture as to what the lessons are for this person in this lifetime. And that's where it's fascinating. That's where it's amazing. That's where you can really get to the core essence of something and sit there and go, wow, okay, yeah, there is something actually a lot deeper going on over here. right? Dive deep into it. And that's what separates it from all the other systems. It's not that it's better or worse, it just offers something that allows us to access a very deep dimension in us and help us process that and understand the whys behind it using a natural law, which is just understanding the natural systems of where we as human beings are and how we're interfacing with reality. So I hope that this video kind of creates not only a deep sense of clarity around why the house systems are the way that it are, and that it's very simple. It's just a different measurement and they're doing different things. And what you feel called towards is what really is going to dictate it, but you can't blend the two together. You can't blend Jyotish astrology and numerology together. It's just not going to work. So the house system itself, Porphyry, chosen specifically because it measures the nature of time and the soul, and it links in with the law of three. 4 cardinal points, 3 houses in between, right? And this is something that I actually teach in my astrology school. On my website, I've actually got a whole entire school that's available that you can purchase, and you go ahead and you actually learn through the school how to read a chart from an EA perspective. And a lot of people, including myself, have actually been called to this work, not because of the fact that it's another way to get a personality trait, but for a deep sense of healing. I mean, for me personally, to understand the reason why Mars and Venus in my chart are actually squaring my nodes, making a 90-degree tension angle, has been hugely liberating for me. Just the fact that I was able to become aware of why that soul has created these types of dynamics has been liberating. So that is the reason for me like sharing this. That's the reason for me bringing it to the collective in these YouTube videos and talking about it and seeing reality from that perspective. Because those that resonate with your emotional and psychological relationship to life, well, then this is the exact system that helps you with that. Okay. All right, guys, thanks very much for listening. I appreciate it. If you're interested in actually learning astrology itself, in the description as well as in the comments, there's a link to go to my website and look at those sort of courses. And, you know, when you're ready, dive into them. And I'm there to help you along with that process. Other than that, have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.